Well, I'm going to start this talk by first off with a disclaimer. Is I am not a Mongolian archaeologist. And I got into this situation of doing Mongolian archaeologist by a back door, and I'm going to tell you about that. And I also want to thank Josh for giving me an entry into my talk, because exactly what he said about survey and conservation and incorporating local folks is exactly what we've been trying to do in Nart. So, here we go. The red circle is the location of Nart. When we started there, nothing was known about this area, particularly of this reserve. And the reserve was one of the Mongolian federally protected areas, but it was protected because of the endangered wildlife, namely the Argali sheep, the ibex, and the raptors, the wonderful vultures and other kinds of raptors that were there. And they started, and then of course it's progressed down to insects now and plants. But when they started, it was specifically for learning how to manage the herds of Argali and ibex. So this project was started by the Denver Zoological Foundation. And one thing I didn't know about zoos in the United States is they are obligated to maintain their whatever license or approval to help other countries outside of the states with the management and conservation of their wildlife. So the Denver Zoo has projects all over the world. And these are the topics that I will cover: how I got started there, what we knew, what we found, what we did, and what we're doing now. And finally, what was successful and what was not successful. And I want to preface this talk by saying that Nart was a subject of a UN initiative to work out a model planning document for a protected area in Mongolia. And this included everything about Nart. It was a 5-year plan. They called me in at the very last moment, of course, because by the time we started, they realized that not only did they have wildlife and grasslands and all these other things, but guess what? They also had cultural heritage sites there in the park, which they knew nothing about. So that shows you what happened there. At the time I got started in this project, I was an archaeologist in the Colorado Desert District that included Anza Borrego Desert State Park. And while I am not a Mongolian expert or even really very knowledgeable, I'm a lot more knowledgeable now than I was then, the team from the Denver Zoo had noticed these mounds of rocks, and they didn't know what they were, and also these slabs sticking straight up out of the ground. And they knew nothing about it, nor were they really, really very interested. So they came to me and they said, how would you like to go to Mongolia? And I said, sure, and so I did. And they had an ongoing Earthwatch project for many years there at Nart, based on wildlife conservation. So the political part of this, as due to some of the people in Anza Borrego, they established Nart and Anza Borrego Desert State Park, which is in Southern California, east of San Diego, in the desert, as official sister parks. And I don't know how they did it, but they got our Governor Schwarzenegger to sign the papers, and of course, with everything else, big ceremony. So we now have an official tie. And since I was the archaeologist, I got part of that sister park relationship. So it was a need to have a park oriented. So everybody here, as far as I know, have not worked within any of the Mongolian protected areas. So that's our project, is in a protected area. And therefore, I think we have sort of an optimum situation where we really don't have to worry about development. But that protected area had no funding, had no administration, had no boundaries that were set on the land, and so we call it a paper park. So what we knew is what all of you have heard about before, is that how in this stage of rapid growth of the Mongolian economy and exploitation of its mineral sources, there were a lot of impacts on the wildlife by poaching, looting of burial monuments by local people, illegal mining within the reserve for semi-precious stone, the so-called ninja miners, and the use of Nart roads, as they are, by heavy trucks that were using the park or the reserve, I use those interchangeable, as a conduit between the mines and wherever they were going to deliver their loads, thus creating a lot of noise pollution that affected the wildlife, and visual pollution, and sound pollution. We also had at least 6 herder families who had been attached to the land in Nart for some time and continue to live within the reserve. So, according to the maps for the Academy of Sciences, there were no cultural sites at Nart. And we knew also that we would be working with a Mongolian archaeologist. So when I got there the first year with 10 volunteers in tow and just me and a volunteer from Anza Borrego, we were handed a list of 52 locations where the biologists had seen these strange stone features. And so they consisted just of burial monuments, Tibetan rock art, and monastery remains. We had no maps. We had no markings on the edge of the reserve. We had a political mandate that we could not go into the south part of the park because the political administration there were selling off poaching licenses, and we were not getting along with the northern part of the park. And we had a camp staff that were absolutely unaware of the cultural heritage resources all over the ground. So they were driving all over the sites. They were, the first night we got there, one of the students that came with my Mongolian colleague ran out and came back with his pockets full of artifacts from a nearby site. So there was no real concept of cultural heritage conservation. But we had a beautiful base camp, we had drivers, and we had all the facilities to start to do something. So what to do? Well, the first thing we started to do is we started to go out and locate some of these monuments from the list that had been given to me. Well, guess what? They were all along roads. Can you believe that? And secondly, they were all very obvious monuments, burial monuments, slab burials, Hirixors, and Buddhist rock art. So Dr. Serendagva, who is here, the gentleman in blue, and I said, you know, enough of this. We don't want to go out and record any more Hirixors. So we took out a map and we looked at places where there weren't any dots on that map to show where the biologist had seen burial monuments. And we selected 4 different areas to just walk across in a very intensive pedestrian survey. So, guess what? Every one of those survey transects had sites on them that were very much more subtle on the landscape. We expanded our site types from about 4 or 5 to 16. And in the first year, our 2-week field session, we recorded 33 sites, and which included large residential artifact scatters, Iron Age artifacts mixed in, tool stone quarry, stone tool workshop and production areas, Bronze Age rock art that they had no idea was there, and a Turkic monument that was unknown, and Mongolian Empire burials. So just some photographs for you of what we found that first year. So my goal and my marching orders is to work out a viable cultural resources management plan for Nart. Now, as I said, I'm not a Mongolian expert, but I am very, very experienced in working in desert areas. And my first post-retirement job from University of California, Riverside was in state parks. That's how I ended up at state parks. So I am now very, very knowledgeable about how a park should be run. So I try to transfer what I knew about park management to Nart. So we worked out site records, we worked out how we were going to map, how we were going to record, where we were going to keep the records, what we were going to collect, what we were not going to collect, and work this out with our Mongolian colleagues. And then because the park had no funding at all from the government at this time, we needed to try to work out some means of creating some economic benefit to the local folks. And so the hope was to create a cultural tourism kind of a program where local people could be trained as guides and make some money, get certified and make some money with visitors that came to the park, mainly to see the wildlife, but also to help them recognize that people are part of the landscape too, and the landscape had been used over a long period of time. So this is my first rudimentary map that was made on a little map that the biologist had in a little tourist guide. I had no maps. And those 4 ellipses in red were the 4 areas that Dr. Sarandagva and I picked to do some survey. So I said, I know how to do this because I had done it at Borrego and I had done it at Joshua Tree National Park. We'll work out a sample survey because there was no way we were going to survey that whole park. So that's what I did. So it's very rudimentary, but I drew the random sample and we went in and started to record some of the sites in the sample that I drew. So this was our year that we embarked upon our random sample survey, our volunteers and the crew. So this is us walking across the landscape, intensive pedestrian survey, 15-meter intervals across the landscape in those sample areas. We found lots and lots of things, all kinds of things. We also found a site type that they had no idea that they had there, and these were these cave burials. How many of you have seen cave burials of the Mongolian Empire period? Well, these were cave burials that hadn't been emptied out yet. There's a whole area, And if we had not had that random sample, I remember sending the team out that day and saying, oh, it's all rocky, you're not going to find anything. And this is what they found. They found human remains, grave goods, bowls, and other items of precious metal. So on our sample survey, we found lots and lots more of the slab burials, of the Bronze period. We started because my interest is in lithics, a certain kind of lithics, and I was always looking for places where these beautiful tool stones that we saw and do see all over Nart came from. Found places, sources of stone, and all over. And I mean, it's archaeologists' dream there because nothing had been touched, with beautiful blade cores and many, many other fine stone objects. So what we did was 23 random sample blocks, each 500 by 500 meters intensive. It's a very small sample, but given that we had a 2-week field season and volunteers, I thought, well, we need somehow to find out what we're going to write a management plan for. So this gives you some of the results of that random sample. We found some pretty interesting things. Mainly that using that sample from because it was a random sample, that we could predict that there were almost 5,000 cultural heritage sites at Nart. And this is a sample of the how these were distributed. We still had very many burials, but 18% of our sites were what we call Neolithic, which probably we know now are not Neolithic, but they're probably mixed Bronze Age, early Bronze Age, and Neolithic sites. So this site distribution was generated from our random sample, and those are on the right side are the types of burials that we found. So now we knew how many sites we could expect at Nart, and we found out that there was a distinct difference, statistically significant difference between the north of Nart and the south, based likely on geology. And we increased our number of site types that were present. And we also, because we knew that many people had worked on the Bronze Age monuments, we said, well, we're not going to work any further on those kinds of things because other people have worked and are working on them. We're going to pick something else. So we picked, as everybody has, some people have talked about, the transition period to pastoralism. So that was the period that we decided that we would talk about, and also 18% of our sites were potential sites of this time period. So, and it also allowed us to concentrate our law enforcement efforts on specific site types. And that means volunteer rangers that were supported by donations from the United States through the Anza Borrego Foundation, because there was no money for rangers. And that we had the ability to focus our cultural tourism efforts on sites that were duplicated many times and that we felt that tourists would not damage. And we had a basis upon which to develop a GIS modeling, which is now in progress, and who my colleague, Jennifer Farquhar, who's sitting back there against the wall, will be using in her dissertation at the University of Pittsburgh. So, at this point, Nart has expanded because of the increased interests of local to include other protected areas outside of the Black Line, which is very nice. And we now have a director, which is located in the local SUM Center. And we have more of an administrative structure. Let's see, just last year, we went back to test the differences we saw between the North and the South of Nart. They are different sumes, so the political structure is different from the north and the south. And our sample that we did last summer supported our observations from the random sample that indeed the sites were much more frequent in the northern part of Nart. So what we're trying to do is build cultural heritage capacity among the Mongolians. So this has always been a goal. We wanted the Mongolians to be able to take over the management of this park and perhaps other parks and reserves within Mongolia. So these are, I'm not going to read these to you, but these are some of the things we did to increase interest and ownership in the local communities. And some more photographs showing what some of our activities were, delivering artifacts that had been lined up by tourists at certain sites. You know how they collect it, and we have little piles of stuff. Well, we brought those to the local museum. We identified them. We created an exhibit. We brought monastery, beautiful objects from the monastery out there. We have a nice interpretive booklet that we put in all the tourist places at the Sum Center, and we hand out to visitors in both Mongolian and in English. And after I told you that I participated in the in the 5-year plan, sorry. And this is what I wrote in appendix 2, and as I said, I was brought in at the very last minute for this. So we developed an interpretive sign for the research camp in both Mongolian and English. We got a grant from the U.S. Embassy in Ulaanbaatar to hire a ranger who was specifically dedicated to watching the cultural heritage sites. We had money, we bought him a motorcycle, we equipped him, we gave him a list of sites to visit on a rotational basis, and that program is still in effect. We also provided international cultural heritage exchange opportunities to 3 Mongolian archaeologists who were working with us. They came to the US, they visited parks, they visited they learned English, they visited archaeologists in the field and sites in the desert areas. And then we brought our cultural heritage ranger, Choi, to the US in October, actually, of this last year. Was it? No, it was in the springtime to attend an International Ranger Congress near Denver, Colorado. Oops. Just some photographs to show our Mongolian colleagues on their international exchanges. The yellow sign is our big interpretive sign at the entrance to our research camp. The top photographs is the installation of our cultural heritage ranger, who was one of the local herders. And he is really hot stuff. He has great status among his people because he has a motorcycle and he has a uniform and he has authority to monitor the cultural heritage sites. So as of last summer, we have recorded 156 cultural heritage sites in Nart, but we know there are 5,000. We are continuing to build capacity in management among our Mongolian colleagues, and we are focusing our survey because now we know that most of the major sites, not surprisingly, are along major drainages. We're using some geoscience methodologies to locate and investigate this period of the transition to pastoralism, and we believe that last summer, through a method of doing augering across a valley, that Arlene Rosen, Professor Rosen at the University of Texas, Austin, who has come on as our environmental archaeologist, has located the kind of site we were looking for, and we've learned a lot about that. We have used our data and experience to start to develop GIS predictive models, and Jennifer Farquhar, my colleague here, gave a paper on this at SAA on Sunday. So we're starting to reap benefits from this. This summer, we're going to initiate a program of paleobotanical recovery from the soils, and we're trying to encourage academic research projects. I have my own little project that I'm doing, and some of our Mongolian colleagues are doing projects too. And we are assisting our Mongolian students, of which we had 8 last summer, along with our Mongolian colleagues, to increase their English language skills. Whoops, I'm not good at pressing buttons, obviously. This was some of our work in the last 2 summers, and we're doing some of that work that Will says we can use with 3D modeling of mapping, laborious mapping work to scale. And there's Arlene in the lower left, educating our Earthwatch volunteers about the climatic periods as illustrated in the drainage profiles. So we have now opened a very nice site, and we're going to be opening some more this summer. We're doing augering, locating other sites of this type. We're publishing papers, and we have a master's thesis as a result of the work in Nart from one of our Nart graduate students on ceramics. So if anybody needs a good ceramics guide from this part of the country, from the south, central, eastern part of the country, we have some really good data, and we're working on getting some of his ceramic types into English so other people can use them. So what worked? Well, we certainly have a clearer understanding of the cultural heritage landscape of Nart. When we went there in 2010, we knew nothing. We have a greater awareness generated from the staff of the research camp. They do not drive off the roads anymore unless they absolutely have to. They used to come and pick us up after work and drive right across the site we were working on. So they don't do that anymore. But we have a training every year to make sure that they haven't forgotten. That we have local herder families monitoring the sites out there, and they report to us if they see any looting or other impacts. We have hopefully developed the ideas about cultural heritage preservation among our Mongolian colleagues, and we still hope that Mongolia will develop a program in cultural heritage management at one of the universities. Some of the elements of that program are already in place. Will they be sustained? I don't think they'll be sustained unless we develop that program that I was speaking about. Our cultural heritage ranger has been a great success. Not only has he watched our sites, but he's found new sites for us to go and record. And we do have a formalized plan for developing cultural tourism in Nart. Well, what didn't work? Well, we did a lot of outreach to the schools. We made a PowerPoint presentation and a curriculum for the teachers. But since we have a summer field season, the kids are on vacation, it's a little bit difficult. We really need a presence year-round for that. We were trying to develop this cultural tourism to promote some sort of economic viability for Nart. There's no entrance to the park. There's nothing coming into this entity. But most of the since the plan is there, I have not been able to actually implement it because I can't locate the people to be the guides. And we need some leadership on that part, and speaking with folks from statistical research and their connections, we may have a way to do that. But most of the rangers are still supported by donations from the state, private donations. And we continue to have this viability, this financial sustainability is still very problematic. There's, as I said, there's no entry fee. There's no way to generate money. There are ways, but it hasn't been done. And our hopefully Mongolian-based cultural heritage management programs are yet to be. And I hopefully will be included in the new 5-year management plan that is due to come out this year. And I would rather be part of everything in it and not just tagged on at the last minute. So this was our team last year. It has grown, and some of you will see yourselves in this picture. So where we started and where we are today. Well, we have all these recorded sites, and they're fully recorded on models based on the California State Parks site recording system. We're still working on that original list of all those herring-sores and slab burials. We know there are other sites that need to be recorded, and we'll be working on that this summer. We've now embarked upon robust research projects. We're on the local radar screen. When we came there, the folks in town did not even know that there were cultural heritage resources in this park. They knew about the argali and the ibex, but they knew nothing about the archaeology. We have American and Mongolian universities participating. As I said, we have professional publications and many presented papers. We've developed cooperative relationships with other Mongolian researchers. And we have a site monitoring and protection program. We now have an administrative entity, at least we have somebody to deal with locally. And we will have soon, hopefully, an updated management plan that will include more cultural heritage management. And I'd like to acknowledge all these institutions for helping us accomplish this, because virtually we were supported by Earthwatch, and we really will continue with Earthwatch this year, but we are separate from the Denver Zoo now. We have our own independent project, and it is in cooperation with the University of Texas, Austin. Thank you very much. Anybody questions?
Saint, to put it mildly, in creating this program nearly single-handedly, with a lot of assistance on the Mongolian side. But you can just imagine, how many instances like this we need around Mongolia to make a big difference in a specific case.
And we can talk about that more tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We can do that.
Questions?
Other questions? I don't even know where to start.
Tell them about your experience at
I was there
Nart.
last October, and it was a fabulous experience. But I have more questions than answers. Just starting with one particular example, the one ranger that you mentioned, it's impossible given the size of that park. And there was talk about adding some funding to hire a second ranger, and I don't know where that stands at this point.
Well, remember that ranger has a motorcycle.
I know, he can do a lot, but still, it's a huge part.
There are other rangers, but the other rangers are concerned with poaching and other things. They do help too, but there are several other rangers. But all those rangers are paid, their salaries are paid by donations through the Anza Borrego Foundation. Okay.
So piggybacking on that, I wonder how much of an issue language is, whether it's the ranger or the local tour guides that you refer to.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that the two languages are so different from one another.
Well,
Everybody that I met there, the locals.
Yeah. Spoke English?
Huh?
Did the locals
Well,
speak
had
to?
enough of a grasp of English
Mhm.
to be able to do anything. So anybody who would go in there, relying on like Earthwatch, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And this gentleman, and I don't know his name, but he tells me that when he was there in October, he was on a wildlife team for Earthwatch. And he neither heard nor saw anything about the cultural heritage, which I think is very interesting because it's all over the place.
So there's one more comment.
Yeah.
The Argali sheep
Mhm.
that you showed a few pictures of for anybody that's interested. It's the world's largest sheep that we know of.
Yep.
And unfortunately, one of the draws to the park.
Talk in the microphone.
One of the draws is from hunters who will pay
Mhm.
$20,000 for a permit to go in for a short period of time to hunt one of these animals.
Yeah. $50,000.
Excuse me, I have to take the flight, and if you keep the schedule on time, I would really appreciate it.
Yes, I will. That's up to the moderator. Not me.
Just a quick follow-up to that last bit there
Yeah.
on the hunting. So do you think that's a good or is it positive or negative, that paying $50,000 to bag an argali? Couldn't that money then be used for conservation in the area? What is your feeling on that?
What a unique thought. I think they do use it, but it's for conservation of wildlife.